All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here and welcome to this month's edition of VentureLab's Female Founder Speaker Series. We are joined today with entrepreneur Audrey McLoghlin. And now to you, Melissa, take it away.
Thanks so much, Leah. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Melissa Hefner with Georgia Tech's Venture Lab, co-creator with Sarah Henderson, who's on the call, of our Female Founders Program, an entrepreneurship program by women for women. And today we're delighted to introduce you to Audrey, Georgia Tech alumna, class of 99, founder and CEO of luxury clothing brand Frank Eileen, and our inaugural Female Founders benefactor, donor. Audrey has invested in our program, and we're just really delighted that you're here with us. Audrey was actually in Atlanta on Monday to visit Georgia Tech. She visited with Georgia Tech leadership. She got to meet a number of our female founder alumna participants, and we're excited to introduce her to the rest of you. I feel pretty confident you're going to love hearing her story today. So, Audrey, thank you for being here.
Melissa, thank you so much. And it's wild, like I said, like an incredible whirlwind trip to Atlanta and Georgia Tech in particular. Feels like I was there for a week when I think about how much we accomplished in one day. So that's incredible. Thank you so much for what you exposed me to on Monday.
Well, I have to say, Sarah and I have been pinching ourselves since Monday, and we continue even today. We keep getting feedback from folks that are reading about the visit or that are following back up with us that met with you. And it was really an invigorating day to spend in conversation with you, with Georgia Tech leadership, talking about women in entrepreneurship, equity and inclusion in STEM. So I'd love for you to talk us through your story. I know everyone, it's like the first question I feel like you got every meeting on Monday. So we're just going to go ahead and get it out of the way here. But how you went from graduating with an industrial engineering degree from tech to starting a clothing line.
I think, we laugh about it. I think it's the most common weird look I get all the time where people, they kind of tilt their head and say, how did you go from engineering to fashion? I'm like, oh, it's really an obvious path, right? And then laugh. But, I graduated over 20 years ago now. And it's interesting because I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I think, I could tell a short version or a long version, but my family immigrated from Ireland. I came to the United States when I was 3. And so we really grew up with this mentality where my mom would tell me all the time, like, listen, we came to America for the American dream. Like, you can be anything you want. It doesn't matter that you're a girl. Like, you can be anything you want, as long as you're a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. So as I grew up, I always had that in my head. And you guys laughed a little when I told you Georgia Tech was the only school I applied to. Thank you so much for accepting me and letting me in, because I did not have a backup plan for that. I think I've always taken that mentality of failure is not an option. So I set my sights on going to Georgia Tech, and taking no for an answer was not really on the list. So I applied there and then went through the industrial engineering program. And, I had no relationship with like an entrepreneurial community or team or even spirit. I didn't even know what that was. And it certainly didn't exist back in the 90s at Georgia Tech. So I really had no idea what I wanted to do, like really had no idea. And I would go for long distance runs all around Midtown and just stare at these huge buildings and the unbelievable amount of construction that was going on. And I would think, I know I really want to build something. I don't know what that means or what that looks like. I would look at these massive holes in the ground with cranes and think, like, do I want to build buildings? Do I want to build a company? How do you do that? I felt so tiny and small and had no idea how to even put like one foot in front of the other. But when I graduated, I moved to MIT. It was in the middle of the first .com boom, for anyone who's old enough to remember that. And that was a really interesting time. And then ultimately, when there was a very major .com bust back then, I felt like I still didn't know what I wanted to do, but I really felt like I didn't actually want to be in tech, that I wanted to use my education and the way I think about problems. And I wanted to learn about manufacturing. And I was really intrigued by the clothing industry and supply chain and manufacturing in that industry. So I just packed up and moved to Los Angeles and bought a car on Craigslist, which was like a brand new thing back then, and found an apartment online, and all these kinds of technologies were so new. It was like unheard of to do this stuff. But I moved across the country, and this month is actually my 20th anniversary of being in Los Angeles. And a lot of it was really just accidental, just like, trying to scramble my way around to meet people and figure out what I wanted to do. And, it's something that comes up over and over, where for me, both growing up and through college and as a young adult, I didn't have any mentors or male or female, to be honest, and really didn't have any sort of like support system. And that's something now that I'm very mature in my entrepreneurship journey that is really important to me to give back and help women in particular have that support structure, and maybe help them not take as long as I did to get through the journey, or to the good part of the journey, I'd say.
And thank you for saying that you didn't know what you wanted to do, because I think so many of us think that, especially those folks who are wildly successful like you are, that you've had a plan for forever, right? And you're just executing on that plan. You had a very clear understanding of where you needed to go to school, what you needed to study, and then what your path was going to be like after graduation. And that's not true, right?
Not at all.
First of all, I think it's a lot to ask of us to pick a school at 17, 18 years old, and then to pick a career at 22, 23 years old, right?
I think it's a very small percentage of people, maybe because of either whatever their parents do or what they were exposed to as kids, know exactly what they want to do. But I think it's daunting. Like you said, at 16 years old, I'm supposed to know where I want to go to school, what I want to study, what I'm going to be when I grow up, versus I think most of us find ourselves in our late 20s saying, what do I want to be when I grow up? Right. I think that's much more realistic. And don't beat yourself up over it. Right. I think it's just.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Sarah and I push against this myth all the time, trying to consistently dispel this myth that the journey to success for an entrepreneur looks something like this. So you've got an idea, you figure out how to get a prototype made, you show that prototype to folks, you get some investment funding, more things get made with the funding, there's a little bit of luck, and then abracadabra, you're successful, right? And so tell us what it's really like. I know in one of the conversations that we had with leadership on Monday, you mentioned sleeping at the manufacturing building. So what did you think it was going to be like starting this fashion line, being an entrepreneur? And then what has it actually been like?
That's such a good question. It makes me laugh just listening to you ask. So my journey could not have been further from abracadabra success. And one of the most important things that I carry with me as an entrepreneur is honestly a quote I saw in my 7th grade science class, which said, ignorance is bliss. So for me, I remember at the time being a kid, I had no idea what that meant. I just would say it over and over. Like, I don't know what that means. Obviously, as I got older, I understood exactly what that meant. And I think that that's really important in entrepreneurship, because you have no idea what's coming. And I think that's a good thing. I think luckily for me, I had no expectation of quick success. Thank goodness. I did know, even though I had no background in fashion, I didn't know anyone. It's very clear that it's a very tough business. I also had no financial resources at any point in my entrepreneurship journey, but I'm super tough. So I knew I could handle the uphill climb. After all, I made it through Georgia Tech's engineering program. And this was in the 90s when there were very few women around to relate to. So now my entrepreneurial journey is approaching the 20-year mark, like I said. And, to put it in perspective, when I started Frank and Eileen 13 years ago, which was in 2009, it was in the Great Recession. I had just declared personal bankruptcy after my first business failed. And sleeping at the factory for many, many years was simply a very efficient way to get on with less time and less money. And it was also a really efficient way for me to get more attention. So, I would live there and sleep there. I brought a couch actually, so that I liked what I was sleeping on, but I brought my own couch and I'd bring my dog, and I slept there 5 or 6 nights a week. And it worked out really well because I was there at 7 a.m. when everybody came in. Manufacturing starts early. So I'd be there first thing in the morning to get, FaceTime and attention of things that I'd worked on late the night before. I would have my own private dance parties at midnight in the warehouse and set off the alarm sometimes. And then I was also there in the evening around 6 or 7 when everybody kind of started closing up. So I got really like kind of calm, undivided attention on things I wanted to work with in terms of, building the product or processes or anything like that. And so, I mean, for me, it just made a lot of sense to be there all the time and not drive back and forth. But yeah, for some reason it gets quite a chuckle. I mean, it was an interesting environment. We had plastic, those plastic things that go up on the ceiling with clouds on them. I'd be like, oh, come on into my cloud space.
I'm just so impressed they let you do that, right?
I don't know if they had a choice. I just did it. I didn't
you just did it. Nice. Didn't ask permission.
They would leave, and they knew I like to work late, so they would leave and lock up, and then I just never left. So yeah, I think over time it became known that I was sleeping there, but we just didn't talk about it.
You mentioned something else. One of the things we talk about with our female entrepreneurs is that there is some disparity in sort of who can get things rolling because of resources that they have access to. And you mentioned that you didn't have a pot of cash that you were working from, right? It sounds like you didn't have friends and family, giving you portions of savings of theirs so that you could begin to build what you wanted to do. And I think, again, that's also so helpful for our women to hear that. Is it going to make it infinitely harder? Yes. Can you still do it? Absolutely. So you don't necessarily have to have access to the resources that a lot of folks do in order to be successful.
Right. I mean, there are so many different ways, and there's the bigger way and the scrappy way. So I will say in my entire journey, so before I started Frank and Eileen, I had started my first company ever. Now, I think it's become more accepted now for people to understand how common failure is in entrepreneurship, right? But I think it's pretty uncommon, except for maybe Mark Zuckerberg, for entrepreneurs to not have a story where there was something else before that either never took off or that took off and then crashed and burned. I mean, it's very common to fail in entrepreneurship first. So many things have to come together for it to succeed. So when I started my first company, I went out and got an SBA loan. And that was incredibly helpful, right? Because I didn't have any access to capital. Now, what I didn't understand and learned early on, I was like 25 years old, is that even the SBA won't give you a loan unless you have money, right? So banks will give you money when you have money. So it's an important thing to learn. When you don't have money, no one wants to give you money, which I think is why so many people assume you have to go down the venture capital route, which is a whole nother discussion. But so I went to get this SBA loan, and they were willing to give me a loan, which is what I needed, but I needed this down payment for the loan, right? That I did not have. And I was very fortunate at the time that my mom, who had always been my biggest cheerleader, and, on one hand, the person that said I had to become a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer. But once I did that, she was immediately like, well, now you can really do whatever you want. Like, now go be an entrepreneur, do whatever you want. My mom took a mortgage out on her house to give me the down payment for the SBA loan.
Wow.
I ultimately saw some early success in my first company, and then the Great Recession hit. I also got sued by a very large company and ultimately crashed and burned in the most ultimate way. Not only lost my company, I lost my mom's, the money that she had taken out on our house. It was completely devastating, not only to me, but to my whole family. So that's definitely an important part of my journey, and being able to be incredibly resilient and get back up when you're at your absolute lowest point. And the good news about that is there's nowhere but up, right? Like, you look at it that way, like just, wipe my tears, get back up, brush off my knees, and I got to get going again because, I've got much further now to climb than I originally thought I did.
Mm-hmm.
So after that, but it was really interesting because I can speak a lot to building a company with no money, because while I was so fortunate originally for my mom to be able to help me in a small but meaningful way, I lost it. Right. I mean, so when I started Frank and Eileen, which I was building the company kind of behind the scenes at the factory in 2008, I went to New York for New York Fashion Week to kind of launch the brand in September 2008, the very month that the entire economic kind of security fell out of the country. So it was a wild time to try to launch, a fashion brand. And so not only did I not have any money, I had negative money, and there was negative money in the entire economy. Like nobody was giving loans. My American Express had been canceled. I had no credit cards, no loans, no access to money. So, definitely really taught me an unbelievable financial resilience of exactly how to, brick by brick and dollar by dollar, build a company when you don't have any access to capital.
Yeah, Audrey, your transparency about all that is really refreshing, because I think we do a poor job of explaining our origin stories. And there is a lot of bravado and ego with folks who have become really successful to make you think that they always were, right? That it was just going to happen for them. And so thank you for letting us know that sometimes it doesn't always work, but that doesn't mean you quit. Right. You just have to figure out what to do next.
So, I had mentioned to you that I didn't have any real life mentors, and I don't think I was conscious of it, but I unconsciously knew I needed it. So what I did back then that I still to this day do, you even asked me at dinner, what kind of books do I read? So I only read entrepreneur biographies. And now I read them on Audible. But back then when there was no Audible, that's all I would read. So I would just read and read, whether it was books, articles, stories. And I felt supported in the fact that there was a common theme of failure, and how basically desperate these entrepreneurs, these were all books about very successful people at this point, right? They were all men, but to read about how desperate they had gotten and how close they had gotten to giving up, but that they ultimately just got back up and tried again. And then they were ultimately successful. That was very powerful for me to understand and relate to. And I remember the exact day. I mean, I was bankrupt. I had lost everything. And, I just felt like, oh, I've been trying so hard and so long. I'm going backwards, not forwards. And my sister, who was very not entrepreneurial at all, called me on the phone one day and she was like, Audrey, you're going to be really successful someday. And I'm like crying. I'm like, I'm successful. Like I'm bankrupt. I can't even buy a hamburger. She just had this confidence. She's like, I don't know how or when, but you just have the grit and the resilience, and you want it enough, you will be very successful someday. So I kind of put that in my pocket and carried it with me for many years when things weren't so pretty.
Yeah, we need people in our camp and on our side to tell us those kinds of things, and for us to actually hear them, right? For us to allow them to speak to us in that way and speak into us. So that begs the question, are you working on a book? When do we get to read about a wildly successful female entrepreneur and learn from her?
I'm not, but people ask me a lot. I mean, I don't have time to do that at all, but it's funny. I've been asked so many times, I'm like, why would anyone want to hear my story? I really don't understand it, because it's not, it isn't for me. It's not like anything unusual or interesting, but I think the more I hear from other people, that I think maybe people's favorite part is hearing how real and raw and messy and painful the whole thing is. But if you love it, it's also really exciting and challenging and makes you grow so much. And so I do sometimes take these notes now and we'll tag them, that if ever in the future there's books, and I've got stories of crazy stuff for days and days. So maybe someday.
I hope someday, because talking to you is one thing, but we don't all get to do that, right? I mean, Sarah and I were lucky enough to spend a lot of time with you Sunday and Monday, and really get to be drawn in, but because you are a natural storyteller. But it would be really nice for you to be able to share that with a much larger audience. So I will buy a copy. How about that? So tell us about the 100 Club.
Oh, that's funny. It's my made up club.
Yes, I love it.
There's
Tell us
no
about
one
it.
in my there's no one in my club, which is, a comfortable place for me. I think I'm used to that. But I just started making it up because it's, as my company grew and became more successful, it became a more common question that people would ask, oh, how many investors do you have? Or how, this on and on. And it's interesting. I was at a big women's dinner a few months ago with some very successful female entrepreneurs. And one of the women that was hosting the dinner decided to make this announcement at the table, like, just so you guys all know, Audrey's the only person here that owns 100% of her company. And I didn't understand how, I don't think even then, it was not that long ago, that I didn't understand how unusual that was. And, and the woman across from me literally leaned in and was like, I could tell she couldn't accept that as fact, and kind of started asking some qualifying questions to understand how I got investors or what, that kind of thing. And it's like, oh, I just don't have any. I mean, it's just black and white, 0 investors, 100% ownership. So it has become a really common question. So I started this idea of 100 Club, which is ultimately like anyone that can retain 100% ownership while scaling their business to 100 million in revenues. And I thought that was just kind of a fun, like 100 kind of thing. But
I love it. And it is incredible. And I imagine that most people did not believe it when she said that. And this is, again, why folks need to hear your story, right? Not just do you have 100% ownership and $100 million generated, but you've done it without giving away any pieces of Frank and Eileen. Okay, so during COVID, you were looking for something to do because you weren't busy enough. Sarah had 2 babies. I learned how to run 6 miles without dying. You became a certified B Corp company. So not all of us know what that means. So if you'll tell us just what does that mean for Frank and Eileen, and then why did you want this for Frank and Eileen?
Okay. Yeah, so B Corps in generally are a relatively new business concept. It started, I believe in 2007. So there is actually a lack of information and a lot of confusion about what they actually are. So I'll give you the technical definition provided by B Labs. So a certified B corporations are businesses that meet the highest standards of verified social and environmental performance, public transparency, and legal accountability to balance profit and purpose. And ultimately, B Corps are accelerating a cultural shift to redefine success in business and build a more inclusive and sustainable economy. So for me, what basically happened is, I had always felt like since the beginning, when I started Frank and Eileen in 2009, I'd always felt like I'd been operating at the standards required by B Corps, but that I had never had the resources to go through the rigorous process. So on March 13th, 2020, a day most of us will never forget, every retail store that we sell throughout the US and Japan closed basically in a day. All of our production globally halted, all of my travel halted. And after dealing with an acute loss of $11 million of revenues in 10 days, I started to look for silver linings and opportunities, right? So I stopped everything I was doing for about 16 hours a day for 10 days. We did damage control to our supply chain across the world, trying to make sure they didn't sustain the same level of losses that we did by all the retailers closing. But then immediately I started getting this, this kind of like bug, like, okay, as soon as I do this, I really got to look for the opportunities here, because this is unprecedented and this is incredibly painful, but where there's pain, there are opportunities. And what I suddenly found myself with was a resource that I had never had as a scrappy entrepreneur, and that was time. So I said, what could I do with this time? And we didn't know how long it was going to last, but I knew we were completely grounded and under quarantine. And especially in California, we were under very, very serious quarantine for a long time. So ultimately I said, okay, immediately, let's just take all these resources we didn't have before. None of us are on airplanes or in other countries or, in in-person meetings. Let's use this time to go through this very rigorous process of getting B Corp certified. And it's incredibly documentation heavy, and it looks at every single aspect of your business. I think that's one of the things that I feel like people don't understand about B Corp. It's not one dimensional. It's not just about sustainability or anything else. They look at every single aspect of your business, from employee benefits to supply chain practices to the materials used in your products and your supply chain. And they look at charitable giving. They look at the entire way of how you run your company, operate, and take care of all of your stakeholders, from your employees, your customers, your partners. And so ultimately, I thought this would be really amazing to be able to communicate to our internal stakeholders, like our team, our employees, our partners, our external stakeholders, our customers who had been with us for so long, and have a way to really show them the level that we've always operated our business at, and kind of helping to share and communicate that we want to be able to use business as a force for good. So that's what made
I love that. As a force for good. So, but you didn't just stop there. So with this certification, you've made a pledge.
Yeah, I don't think I knew that part was going to happen. So like so much of the journey, there's the plan and then the surprises, right? So, at the time, I'm sure, if you guys remember, like applying to college, right? You do it and you're like, no, definitely, I did everything I needed to do to get in here. But the waiting is enough to almost kill you, right? Like, what if I don't get in? I really didn't have a plan B, right? So it was the same feeling when we finally buttoned up and submitted our application to B Corp. It was months and months of work. And we thought, okay, I really think we're going to be good. And you have to get a minimum impact score of 80 to get certified. And of course, by this time I was looking up the impact scores of every other kind of globally recognized fashion brand. And what do they have? And so many of them barely had 80, like 80.1, 80.3. So I started getting very nervous. Like, what if I get 79.9, right? It would just be, I don't know if I could go through this again. The application process was so hard. Or at least, and for me, so hard, right? We've been in business for 12 years. So it might be different when you're starting a brand new company, but you got to lift up the peel back the onion on every aspect of your business that you've been operating for that long. So anyway, when we finally heard back around Thanksgiving of 2020, not only did we get certified, but we got the second highest impact score among any globally recognized US fashion brand, second only to Patagonia. So we are number one for female owned, but when number two to Patagonia was like, right. It's a lot to absorb that, right? Obviously Patagonia and Yvonne are like the leaders by a landslide, and the difference between number one and number two is a chasm. It's unbelievable. But they, this is what they've been building their business on for the last 10 years. They've done such an incredible job. So being number two behind them in our space was shocking and humbling and inspirational. And I thought, okay, well, now we need to take it a step further. So I was like, so I thought, and my passion is female entrepreneurship and education, specifically to help lift women higher up. And I said, you know what, we're going to make a $10 million pledge over 10 years to nurture the female leaders of tomorrow. And to be honest, when I did it, I didn't really know what that was going to mean, but I knew what I wanted. I knew what I wanted our pledge to be and what it would stand for. And then I quickly learned that it's much harder to give away money than I realized. And, I had never embarked on anything like that before. So, then ultimately really figuring out, well, how do I want that to come to life? And who do I want to partner with? And what are they standing for? And how can I support that? Because it's not then just giving away the money, but it's like, how can you be involved and support it and be choosing very carefully and thinking about, what you most believe in. And so when we did that, then we kind of, that was super exciting, and we announced it and then started trying to figure out who we wanted to partner with. And I really wanted to It took me a while, so it makes it sound fast, but it was probably another 6 to 8 months at least. And then started saying, I really want it to be education. I'd really love to impact the education of girls from a very young age, like, K through 12 children, all the way to undergraduate women and graduate level women. And they're at such different stages of their journey, but would love to support and make an impact at all those different levels. So that's how we kind of started trying to look for the right partners.
Well, it is going, it's, not just at Georgia Tech, but it's going to make a huge impact. And just what Sarah and I are now going to be able to do with your gift. We've never been able to provide to these fledgling entrepreneurs any kind of seed grant funding, right? I mean, women are coming and doing this program with us because they just feel led to, they feel compelled to, they have the desire for it. There's nothing in it for them other than learning and growth. And so just to be able to, we can now hand them some cash and say, and now you can do a little bit more, right? Now here's a little bit of a boost, a drop in the bucket, but still a boost that could make a world of difference. We're really grateful for it. What would you say has really taken you by surprise since moving to LA and deciding this is what you're going to do?
That's a good question. I mean, it's interesting. Again, it's like, it's this big year where I'm like, ooh, I'm coming on 20 years. I think I had no idea. I would have thought it was like 10 or 12. But I think, in general, I think I'm a little bit surprised how different I feel in a way, like in a great way, but I've always loved the journey. But I think when you do something for so long and you're so committed and so resilient, that you grow so much, and things that were once really hard become easy. Things that maybe overwhelmed you no longer overwhelm you. Like I really don't feel stress, and I used to in a profound way. Really, just like, I think it probably affected my health. I cried a lot in the car, a lot. And I ultimately decided, this is maybe not exactly your question, but it makes me think of it. One of the big things that changed for me in those years, it was learning how to deal with stress. So when I went through bankruptcy and all of this stuff, I remember one day I was sitting in a Wells Fargo, which is like, I don't know if you guys have Wells Fargo there, but
we do.
I was sitting in a Wells Fargo, and the woman sitting on the computer, and she goes, hold on. I'll be right back. I turned white, my heart sank. I had no idea what she saw on that screen or who she was going to ask for, but I got up and ran. I ran and didn't look back. I was just running like I don't want to know. But once I left, and then I somehow found out, I don't know if I Googled it or what, there's no such thing as debtor's prison. Okay. So what I really learned is
there used to be, so clearly you'd read it somewhere.
Not debtor's prison. So, you can get yourself in a lot of trouble and it really hurts. But when you really put in perspective, like, how bad does it get? It's never that bad. So, or the way that I did it for myself. So I decided that every time I feel something that should make me feel incredibly stressed, I ask myself one simple question. Could this situation result in death or prison? Because those two things are really stressful. So if whatever I'm dealing with could end in death or prison, then I should allow myself to be really stressed. But if those two things, if whatever I'm dealing with could not result in death or prison, then I don't allow myself to feel any stress. It's just another challenge to be broken into smaller pieces and overcome. And some challenges take a little while and some take a very long while. But not feeling the stress, in a way, not only do I not feel the stress, but I actually enjoy the challenge. And then ultimately you resolve it, and you literally get stronger and stronger and stronger. So I think that's been a big part of my 20-year journey that, that I definitely didn't feel like this 20 years ago.
And that's where your resiliency comes in too. And I know that April asked in chat, some of it probably is just born in you, but where do you think your resiliency has come from through the years? because you don't seem to rest even on achievements, right? I mean, you receive this B Corp certification, then you say, great, but what good can I do with it? You don't have to go that next step. So what pushes you there, and what allows you to spring back when you are shoved down or scared or told no, or someone says they're going to go talk to a manager, and even though you don't know what that is, it puts you into a panic. Where does it come from?
I could answer this question 1,000 different ways, because I think there's so many things that feed into it. But I mean, at my very core, like if I would say, where does it come naturally versus learned? Some people probably heard me share the story before, but like I said, my parent, my family immigrated to the US, and I'm forever grateful for the sacrifice they made. And I always feel like I owe it to them to create the American dream. But it wasn't as pretty as it looked from the outside. And my father was extremely abusive to my mother. And my mom was the one that was so driven. And I mean, my mom could like do anything. She was a maniac, but she was a stay-at-home mom. So, which very much suited my dad. But anyway, we were very isolated. It was very, very abusive. And I just grew up as a little girl thinking, I don't care what happens, but over my dead body, will I ever allow myself to be in the situation that my mother is in? To have 3 small children and basically be forced into a lose-lose situation where she either has to stay in an extremely abusive relationship or risk losing everything and not be able to, support her 3 little children. So I think that was very much a driving force, and probably drove me to all these things of like, failure is not an option. Like, I will do anything to be financially independent and make sure that I never have to make decisions for the wrong reason, either out of fear or, those kind of things. So that definitely was a big driver. And then I don't know, the resilience, like if you, I think you just have to decide if you want it bad enough, right? Because it's really hard. But what I also say is life is really hard, so much harder than anyone ever told me it was going to be. So I just think maybe the path they chose might be incrementally harder than another path, but they're all so hard. So, risk versus reward, you might as well go a little bit harder and have bigger rewards. But, one time I was doing a presentation at Women's International Day. This was right before COVID, when we all actually saw each other in person still. And someone asked me in the audience, what's the best compliment you've ever gotten? And I had never been asked that question before. I thought it was interesting. And I said, I have to say, one day, my lawyer called me, who did my real estate negotiation, right? She calls me and says, Audrey, I just had to tell you something. Listen, she was a cat lady. I always thought you were a cat because you have 9 lives. But today I realized that you're not a cat at all. You are a cockroach. And nothing but nuclear devastation will kill you. Mm-hmm. I was like, thank you so much. That's the greatest.
That is an amazing compliment.
It was really funny. I was like, who would ever think a woman would want to be called a cockroach? That's maybe the grossest image in the entire world. I think I'd rather be called a cat. But it was so interesting that somebody's perspective was, I think she'd watched me go through the Great Recession and just watch setback after setback, and I'd be lit on fire and knocked down and just all these things. And I just pop back up the next day, okay, what are we going to do today? And so that, that was probably at least 10 years ago that she said that. And that's another one of those little things I put in my pocket along with my sister's words, and it just kind of helps to carry you forward.
It absolutely does. And we have a really good question coming in from April. So April wants to let you know she's entering a male-dominated industry. So she wants to know, what are some tips you'd give female entrepreneurs with a desire to keep their business 100% women-led despite the competition?
I don't know if I have a good answer, to be honest. I've always been in, obviously going through engineering, it's all very male dominated. And I know that Georgia Tech specifically is making a lot of progress to change that and making big strides. But certainly when I was there, it was very, very few women. And interestingly enough, even the fashion business, while there are a lot of women in the business, there are very few women in leadership and ownership roles. So once you get, I call it the glass runway. Like there's somewhere where there's, tons of women, but as you get higher and higher up, women are sliding off the runway. And I don't know if this answers the question, but I think, people ask me all the time, like, how do you have it all? Or how do you do it all? Or this big thing that I don't like is that people talk about how women can have it all. And I just don't agree with that. I don't believe that you can have it all at the same time. And I think you really have to sit and think and define what having it all means to you, and only you and you or your family. And depending on what chapter or decade you're in, I think what having it all means to you in your 20s is different than what having it all means to you in your 30s, and different than what having it all means to you in your 40s. And I think you have to not care at all what anyone else thinks, right? And I don't mean like the men that you're surrounded by, I mean including anyone else, your peers, your family. Like you have to really focus on what is important to you, and I don't know, drown out the rest of the noise and just keep marching on. And if you know what your North Star is and what you're going towards, I don't know if anyone or anything around you can really get in your way. Just maybe not even be aware of what's in your way. Just keep going.
And for us to get out of our own way, right? And give ourselves permission to redefine at each stage what it means right then for us to have it all. Absolutely. Or at least have what we're searching for.
Absolutely. And I think, you really need to actually sit down, let's say every 5 years, right? We're really busy, but I really think you have to sit down and do a check-in with yourself of what having it all, or what your, lifestyle design or whatever you want to call it means to you at that time. Because I sometimes think things go so fast and then you don't really know what happened. And all of a sudden, all the decisions you made, I always say like your life is like thousands of micro decisions that all add up and result in the life that you have. And sometimes you all of a sudden look up and be like, well, now I'm not even happy with the life that I have. And it's all the micro decisions I made to get here. But we have to give ourselves the space to know that we change and grow over time. And now maybe we just need to make another set of micro decisions that will maybe slightly change our path or reprioritize the things that are really important to us, and just, remind yourself that that's totally normal and you should do that. And
so let me just end with this. What was your biggest takeaway from those failures that you had early on in your 20s as you're figuring this out? What was your biggest takeaway, and how did it change your approach to entrepreneurship?
That's a good question. So I think, I, for good or bad, started my entrepreneurship journey very young. I did not know my ass from my elbow. So I had what I call blind ambition, and it really, I don't think it really served me well. It was a great journey, and maybe having a really big, painful early failure was good. I do know at the time what I would say at the time was like, I am really glad it's not much later in my life. I am glad I don't have children that depend on me, or, so I am glad, I guess I failed really early. It'd be nice if I hadn't failed at all, but maybe that's unrealistic. But I had blind ambition. So when I look back now, I think I wasn't educated enough to be doing the things I was doing. I think the biggest type of education that I lacked that's so important in being an entrepreneur is financial education. So I just didn't actually understand how money works. I didn't understand how taxes work. I didn't truly understand how different business entities and those tax structures work. And so that's been a big learning thing as I go. But I think I think I think like a lot of people, I didn't have a really good financial education. So if I could do it all over again, I think I would get a lot more of that. I mean, I would do a lot of things differently, right? I would get mentors. I would probably read more. I would sleep more, and a little bit, trade just like pure raw energy and ambition for a little bit more disciplined, education in figuring out a healthier way to achieve what I was trying to do instead of just like bulldozing my way through. And
Yeah, but we all feel that way, right? When we look back 10, 15, 20 years, what would we have done differently? Would we have ended up in the same place though?
maybe not, right? I mean, like I said, I think that your life is a culmination of these like thousands or millions of micro decisions. And, someone even just asked me the other day, like, I mean, it's a little dark, but they said, if you were to die tomorrow, what would be your greatest regret? And I said, I like to think that I wouldn't have any regrets because everything I've ever done has led me to where I am now. And if I had done things differently or prioritized differently or made different decisions, then I wouldn't have the life I have right now. And I think that really helps you to be grateful for where you are and how you got here. And I use that all the time for everything. Like it's really easy, especially as an entrepreneur and especially as a female entrepreneur, you guys, it's really, really easy to look at other entrepreneurs and especially male entrepreneurs and feel envious or jealous or like, I wish I had what they have. But the trick I use that works for everything is that you look at them and say, but the only way you can have what they have is you have to give up everything you have and everything you are and become who they are and what they have. And then the other part to that in entrepreneurship is most of the time it is not what it seems. And when you're doing it long enough and you study companies long enough and you wait long enough for the other shoe to drop, you'll find out that it's rarely not, I mean, sometimes it is what it seems, but it's rarely what it seems. And so you just have to, choose what you want and what your priorities are and really focus on that. And, a good example for everyone here in the audience that I did some more reading on because I was blown away when I found out that MailChimp, which is based in Atlanta, and that Ben went to Georgia Tech, and what an incredible story of patience and resilience and building that company into probably one of the biggest tech successes that and exits that Atlanta has had. And he did it all by maintaining 100% ownership with his partner. They did not take on venture capital, not when they were small, not when they were medium, not when they were large. And so, but he talks a lot about what I believe in, which is patience. And what I tell entrepreneurs, including someone I was talking to early this morning, is listen, you have to understand that you can either grow profitably or you can grow fast, but you cannot do both. So you have to decide what you want. And if you want to grow profitably, which means you don't have to give away ownership, you don't have to give away equity, you can reinvest all the profits that you're making every year, you maintain 100% control, and you can grow the kind of company you want to. And Ben talked about that if he brought on venture capital, the first thing a lot of these people do is actually change a really important part of your business model. They want you to either, in his case, they want you to go after different customers that have a quicker reward. And he's going after he's in the long game, right? And Frank and Eileen is very similar. If I were to bring anyone in, the first thing they would want to do is change my supply chain. Right? Like, oh, you make like, you have the most expensive supply chain in the world. Like you use these beautiful Italian fabrics. No. We can get fabrics for half as much. They're almost as good. And so you have someone come in from the outside and then they want to change the very magic and DNA that has built your company and your loyalty and everything else. So if you're willing to be patient, there's really big rewards for being patient and being able to build your company exactly the way that you want. So that's the only point of view that I really know. And then, there are certain kind of companies that really do need venture capital, and that's a different path and all sorts of things to have your eyes open to if you're going to go that path.
Exactly. Yeah. And know what sacrifices you'll be making as a result. You brought up, we thank you so much for being here. I mean, this has been a really delight to talk to you, and I'm so excited to bring you to our our larger female founder community as well. And when you talked about what it means to have it all and redefining what it means to have it all, you met Casey and Katie at dinner Monday night. They're coming on a Female Founder Speaker Series in April to talk about it on media and what that means in the motivation behind starting it, and trying to redefine what it does mean for us as women to have it all. So thanks again, Audrey. You are a pleasure as always, and can't thank you enough for being here.
So much. I can't wait to hear the other incredible women that are coming up this year. I'll be on in April. Thank you so much for having me. But first, I want to say the work, Melissa, that you and Sarah are doing is so inspiring. And it so far exceeded my expectations. Like I said, when I was able to go through Georgia Tech in the 90s, there was no entrepreneurship program. And there most certainly, obviously, until very recently, was no female founders, female supporting entrepreneur program. So I really, really take my hat off to you and Sarah for blazing that trail and fighting the good fight. And I'm so excited about the leadership support you guys are already getting. And it's very exciting to be part of it. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks for believing in us and investing in us. It's going to make a world of difference.
Absolutely. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
Bye. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next month with Casey and Katie.